and welcome to my very special guest, Benjamin Fulford, coming at us from the fabulously irradiated Tokyo City. Benjamin, what's cooking?
Well, first of all, let me say Tokyo is not cooking. Okay, I've had 3 different Geiger counters with 3 different people. We've checked all sorts of areas, and personally, I have not found any radiation anywhere. And I live here, and I'm not worried. Okay, I think there is a concerted propaganda fear campaign run by the bad guys, if you will, to kind of try to demoralize Japan, because Japan is no longer financing them. Okay, so I'm not scared of radiation, and nor are the people who live here. This is a foreign propaganda campaign, as far as I'm concerned, and that's one of the reasons why I had a breakup with Jeff Rentz, because I believe he's betrayed the journalistic principles and gone into fear-mongering. You recall... Anyway, enough of that. Look, what's really going on...
It's an interesting point, because I'd been talking about this Fukushima radiation sort of semi-apocalypse for some time, and said to everybody, look, if it's the end of the world, then be happy, because now you don't have any excuses to not fulfill your own dreams.
Right. Well, look, I live here, and I have a Geiger counter of my own, not something I looked at on the internet, and I found no radiation, and that's why I'm not worried. All right?
Yeah, fair enough.
Let's do that.
Because that's awesome information to have.
I had a friend who came here from the United States who was so worried about radiation, he brought his Geiger counter, and wherever he traveled, all over the place, he never once found any radiation. Okay? It's a propaganda campaign. There's a small amount of radiation near the site, and it's reported on, and that's it. So please, don't get into a panic. These people require fear. They require panic in order to control us. And you must not play into that. Just look at the facts objectively, and you'll be okay. Now, what's really going on, though, and the whole reason behind all this, is a very esoteric battle that is taking place at the very, very tip-top of the financial system. Now, most people who are, interested in what's happening in the world now realize that there's a problem with the financial system. And they know that there's a problem with fiat currency. Fiat means created out of nothing. What they need to understand is that there's a very esoteric level to the financial system, which involves something called black screens and things called trading platforms. Essentially, people have codes. There's certain people who have very high-level codes that allow them to write $1 million or $1 trillion into a computer screen, and that actually becomes money. And there's a battle over who gets to write these dollars into the computers. Remember, they're just numbers on computers, but they've created an illusion so that people really believe it's actually real stuff in the real world. And I'm part of a group that's battling to take this control away from what is basically a group of oligarchs. It's the old royal families of Europe combined with some newer financial families in the United States, such as the Rockefellers, who are behind this. And this group, I know it's hard to believe, but if you check the evidence, you'll know that this group of oligarchs was afraid of losing control over the planet. And they have been trying to start World War III. And we're trying to stop them, and we're trying to take away the control of the money printing machine from them. That is the battle. It's taking place at 2 levels. One level is the people who are waking up and understanding that they're being ripped off. They know the problem is something to do with Wall Street and Washington and money, and they know it has something to do with the European Union. But they're still not quite focused on this specific problem. And that's where this group I'm involved in, the White Dragon and our allies, are fighting at a higher level with the intelligence agencies, military authorities, and people in the banking system who were actually involved in honest banking, who are helping us to get these people out of the system.
Could we perhaps look at this as a two-pronged attack? We have the White Dragon, secret society, and various networks against the Rothschild secret society and various networks. And then we have the people that serve those Rothschild's secret society networks coming up against the people in the general public who are waking up to what's going on. Is that about right? Is there a two-pronged approach here on both sides of the coin?
I would say, look, my understanding is that there's two factions that wanted to start World War II or World War III. Okay, one faction is the sort of Rothschild Zionist faction, and they wanted to start World War III, wipe out 90% of humanity, and rule the rest of the world with Jerusalem as their capital and the Rothschilds as kings of the planet. Okay? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The other faction is what I'd call the Bush Nazi faction. They also wanted to start World War III, but they wanted to wipe out Israel in the process and have an Aryan group ruling the planet. But they both agree that they need to kill lots of people in order to cement their rule, and they wanted fascist dictatorial rule.
So we're talking about two different groups, one that uses Fabian socialism and the other one who uses National Socialism as their political ideology.
That's right, more or less. And, the obvious conflict where people could see it in the open was the George Bush Jr. Al Gore election, where you have either war on terror or global warming as the two alternatives. Global warming is what I call global nuking. It was a big push by the nuclear industry to take control of the energy of the planet, and that is the ultimate source of power for the oligarchs, is control of energy. And of course the war on terror was, no, let's go and seize all the oil in Central Asia and make sure that we continue to control the world's oil supply, and we'll rule the planet through controlling oil energy. So these are the two groups that were fighting, and then against them is what I would call the rest of the world. The group that was behind the non-aligned nations, for example, are angry because they had all their money stolen by these people. You remember, people need to understand what the Kennedy assassination was about. It had to do with something called the Hilton Green Memorial. It was an international agreement whereby the non-aligned nations pledged their gold and treasure to back up a dollar printed by the U.S. government, not by the privately owned Federal Reserve Board, in order to finance a Marshall Plan to develop Asia and Africa, to modernize these two areas. And instead, Kennedy was killed, and this group fraudulently took ownership of that treasure from the non-aligned nations. And they did so by creating what are known as mirror accounts. These are accounts that are identical to the real accounts, but because they created them themselves, they can control the signature. And this was created by Henry Kissinger, and they've been using this to control a large part of the world's money ever since. And the group I'm involved in is trying to take that right back. And hey, you stole that money, you don't have a right to it. Who are you anyway? Who gave you that right? And you realize that at the very tip-top of the financial system, we're dealing with fraud. Now, some of these people can claim historical rights. For example, they were kings for thousands of years, and it was their traditional right. And that's fine up to a point. You may say, okay, well, it's time to modernize and change it. But the other group, they don't even have that historical right. They just stole it in the 20th century. And they can't go and say, well, it's been something that's happened for hundreds of generations. They don't have that right. So what we're having is groups that had the traditional historical rights to most of the world's gold are trying to set up a new gold-backed financial system as an interim measure. Now, you see, gold, and you need to understand about gold, is that there are many problems with the gold-backed system, too. Basically, the people who used to own the world's gold, for them, the golden rule was, he who has the gold makes the rules, which, isn't really something that most of us peasants really like to hear. But the point is that this group at least has something that exists in the real world to back their financial system. And what I've learned from getting involved in all this is that World War II was mainly about taking 90% of the world's gold supply that was not controlled by the Zionists and the fascists and taking it off market, blacklisting it, prohibiting it from being used to back up money. This is what's known as black gold. For example, the Thai family's gold, the Thai royal family had an awful lot of gold, and they're not allowed to sell that. The Shah of Iran, they took all their traditional Persian gold and sent it to Thailand before the Shah was overthrown, and that gold is also blacklisted. And then there's a lot of the Chinese imperial gold was looted by Japan and taken either to Japan or the Philippines, and that gold has been illegally accessed by the Bushes and the Rockefellers and these people since World War II to finance all their horrific activities. The underground bases and secret technology, all that kind of stuff.
Could we talk about these underground bases for a moment here? Because there have been reports, I'm not sure who released them or what their validity is, that some of these bases have been destroyed in recent days.
All right. What I know about this is that, in late August there were 2 earthquakes reported, one near Colorado and one near Virginia, and the location, the epicenters of these earthquakes corresponded with known deep underground bases. And furthermore, the seismograph shows a sudden shake, which is something that you associate with an underground nuclear explosion. And I've had lots of people send me emails, and I've talked to people in the CIA and other agencies who claim to know about this. And the story that seems to be most consistent with the evidence is that 2 nuclear weapons that were going to be used in a false flag terrorism attack were taken away from Homeland Security and then the bad guys, if you want, and they were used to blow up warehouses, underground warehouses, but there was not there were no human casualties.
What was the target? Were they storing things of value down there that they didn't want them to have? Or?
Food and gold and stuff. In other words, just and what I've heard now is that the Pentagon at one point was thinking of creating a false emergency, right, so that all the elite would run into their tunnels. And then they'd know exactly who the bad guys were, and then they'd seal off the tunnels, and they'd have them all in a bag, But they eventually decided against this. Instead, what they've told them is that if you're going underground to hide because you're expecting some kind of big disaster, well, everybody else is going to go underground too. We'll sleep you 10 to a room, but you're not just going to go there and let us military die and everybody else die while you guys sit down there with your, greenhouses and your supply of stocked away booze and whatever. So I've heard that there are anywhere between 13 and 23 big underground bases in the United States, and these are no longer accessible to the elite. And the last one they have that's still available is the big one in Norway. And there's been a lot of inside information about that. The other thing that happened was that, film of these underground bases, including the underground agriculture and stuff, was shown to the leaders of 57 nations, gathered near Monaco in August. And now the leaders of the world know about this. And they know about these plans, and they're not going to be allowed to go ahead with them. In the meantime, the bad guys, I don't know what you want to call them, the New World Order, or the Old World Order, depending. There's a lot of terminology problem out there. But
I just call them the ubiquitous they, whom engage in scumbaggery.
Well, I call them the fascists, because it's basically the same groups that were behind Hitler and Mussolini and stuff during World War II. So I just call them the fascists.
Bush family and the Kissinger and Associates, those.
Yeah, but also the royal families of Europe. Not
so,
all of them.
We're talking about, say, the Anglo-American New World Order. So what's the Fabian?
Well, it's actually it's Anglo-German. and partly American. You know, you can't think in terms of countries if you want to understand these people, because
that's true.
They have powerful influence across countries, but they don't fully control countries.
And they don't really identify with any flag unless that flag is covered in blood.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the Iran-Contra scandal, it's a good indicator. I mean, they can only go so far before there's a pushback from other groups, you know. Now you have Eric Holder, the Attorney General. He's under fire. They're trying to remove him from power because he authorized the selling of guns to Mexican drug gangs, you know. But in any case, these people are going to be taken down. I guarantee you 100%.
Are we talking assassinations, or is there going to be a large...
talking about handcuffs and TV cameras and trials, you know, not assassination. I'm talking about legal means, because these people are criminals, and criminal law should be good enough to get them in jail. The problem is you have to get the people out of the very top of the system. For example, Justice Roberts of the U.S. Supreme Court has to be removed, or the Supreme Court is not really an instrument of justice. It's now an instrument of fascist control. You have to get rid of the head of the Justice Department, because he's one of them. In other words, it's top 1, 2, or 3 people in most of these institutions have been put in place by the cabal or by the fascists, and they cannot be trusted. That's the problem. That's why it's so difficult to remove these people.
Well, they'll endlessly scheme against you. You can't trust somebody like that. I remember I was talking to Thomas Sheridan, who's an expert on the mind of the psychopath, and he said these people are impossible to trust because they will never, under any circumstances, fulfill pledges and not scheme against you, because they are only out for number one and they can't help themselves.
I couldn't list all the operations they've carried out against me. At least 6 assassination attempts. They tried to ban my books. They talked to every colleague of mine and said he's gone crazy. He's a drug addict and don't trust him. It's quite a what they've done. They've tried to entrap me in drug deals. They've tried to get me on this and that. It's quite amazing to see all the stuff they do. They send females to try to spies to try to seduce me and entrap me, and it's been quite a lesson in the sort of stuff these people do. Someday I'll write it all up, but so that in the future anybody else who runs into this stuff will understand. But basically, you have to live like a monk if you want to deal with these people. Otherwise, they'll find something to get against you. Like Strauss-Kahn of the IMF. Well, he was a womanizer, so they got him through a female spy, you know?
But then, and then he got off.
Yeah, you see, I'll tell you about that incident because I know quite a lot about it. He was involved with Gaddafi, and he wanted to replace the U.S. dollar with the SDR, the special drawing right controlled by the IMF. And the people who control the dollar did not want that. That's why they entrapped him. And as soon as he resigned from the IMF, they had accomplished their purpose, and they knew they couldn't take this to trial because the whole thing was a setup. But they achieved their goal by removing him from power, and so they dropped the case.
Yes, so that's all they really wanted to do, was just to create some big scandal to get him out of his position, and then they can just drop it later, and no harm, no foul for them. But they've now replaced Dominique Strauss-Kahn with what's her name, Dominatrix Strauss-Kahn.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that the good thing about that is, though, when they arrested him, he sang like a canary. We got all sorts of good information about the cabal and what they're up to, thanks to that. And so it didn't go according to their plan. And the other thing is that, you know, there are a lot of people, including good guys, who support the continuation of the U.S. dollar. And the reason for this, and this is where it gets complicated, but it's not that complicated, but essentially here's the problem. 90% of the U.S. dollars ever created are not owned by Americans. And a lot of those dollars were earned through honest commerce, you know, the buying and selling of goods, and there's very complex account books, contracts, all this stuff that, you know, kept the global financial and commercial system going, all the paperwork, all the legal work. And you can't just suddenly trash it all without causing a complete collapse of all sorts of stuff. And so what they're trying to do is take control of the honest dollars away from these crooks and then remove the fraudulent dollars created through derivatives and through just arbitrarily putting money in computers from the system. So they're trying to shut down the system, clear out all the fraud, and reboot it. I don't know if they'll be able to pull it off, but that's what they're trying to do.
It's a fictitious problem, so therefore you can just magically make it go away just by forgiving all these derivatives and just pretending like they never existed, because at the moment all they're doing is pretending they do exist.
Yeah, but here's the problem: is you have different groups who have access to codes that allow them to create dollars and put them into the international financial system. And so we're trying to isolate the group that controls the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. This is Bernanke and Geithner and all those crooks. And we're trying to isolate that from the rest of the system.
That's where my prime minister used to work, Benjamin, at the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. He was head of European derivatives.
Well, you should ask him to talk about that. Maybe he was one of the honest guys who got in there, didn't know what was going on. Otherwise, maybe he's a crook. Either way, if you can get an interview, that would be great, you know?
Well, he's a purported great liar, and he's selling off the country's assets, getting us into $400 million worth of debt per week, passing draconian legislation that takes away pretty much everybody's liberties and rights against surveillance with no justification for it, spending enormous sums.
All right, so he's one of the crooks. Well, then you should put him in jail, you know?
That's what I've been saying the whole time.
Anyway, the system they've set up is mathematically impossible to keep functioning. And they're not going to be able to pull this off, I guarantee you. First of all, the Pentagon and the Russian military and the Chinese military all agree that they're not going to get into World War III. So they're not going to be able to start World War III. Even if Israel shoots off a few nukes or they create, you know, more fake incidents, they're not going to be able to start World War III. And that means that they're not going to be able to maintain themselves in power. Too many people are aware of them now in governments, in the media, and especially outside of the Western countries, outside of the corporate propaganda network.
I'd like to get your perspective on Pastor Lindsay Williams. I had him on the show the other week, and he said that in 2012 the elite are planning to do big things, and it's going to be absolutely nuts and crazy everywhere, and particularly with debt and finance. What do you make of that?
He has access to the Rockefeller oil lobby plans, and he performs a valuable function by explaining what's going on with their plans. But you got to remember, this is not a one-sided battle, and there are people who are opposed to them. But what I'm hearing is, you know, the system is falling apart, and it's only fallen apart by 30% so far. We've still got another 70% to go. There's going to be a lot of chaos, and people do really need to understand that at the end of the day, what really matters is the basics: food, shelter,
water.
You know, the essentials for survival. And you just have to make sure that if the local supermarket is shut down and the shelves are empty, you have some alternative. You have some friends in the countryside you can go visit. Or you have a few sacks of rice and bags of beans, so that if things fall apart, you can keep yourself going until things are rebooted. That's the worst case scenario. You know, because these people are not going to go quietly into their night. They don't plan to relinquish power, and they're doing everything they can. That's why they, you know, when Libya said, we're not going to accept your fake euros and your dollars anymore for our oil, you have to have a gold-backed currency. They invaded Libya, they killed Gaddafi, they bombed the hell out of all these people, killing tens of thousands of innocent civilians. And the hypocrisy is just so mind-boggling. Say, oh yeah, humanitarian mission. This is George Orwell at his best, you know. I mean,
Orwell would be rolling in his grave at this point.
Yes, kill them to save them. Humanitarian mass murder. We have to steal their oil in order to save them. And they're going to go after about 5 other African countries now, I'm hearing. This is not over. And then they're still... But
my contention is that Libya, being the most advanced and well-off country in North Africa, also has the best airports and lots of them. So, what better place to take over and use as an airbase is basically to project aerial dominance over the entire continent of Africa.
Well, they're trying to reestablish control of Africa because the Africans were trying to get themselves independent with this African Union and this African dinar,
which Gaddafi was behind.
Yes, but it's not going to go as they plan. I guarantee you, they're not going to be able to pull this off. First of all, you understand that the Pentagon was not involved in the Libyan campaign. Okay, the U.S. mainstream military was not involved. What they had involved was the Bush-controlled part of the CIA with their drones and their they could pinpoint targets but the actual people doing the attacking were Italian, French, and British airplanes. Okay, there were no U.S. warplanes in there. There was no U.S. soldiers there. It was a British, French, Italian special forces operation. And the Pentagon is not behind these scumbags anymore. The only part is But, the United States, again, is not a monolith. You still have the George Bush Center for Intelligence as opposed to the CIA in Langley. Remember, there's 2 CIAs, too. The CIA was created from a merger between the Gestapo, the Nazi secret police, and the OSS, the American group. And they still have 2 main factions there. They have what I'd call the Patriots in Langley, and the drug-dealing terrorists based at the George Bush Center, whatever it's called. And those are the people we have to worry about now. It's the Nazi faction that is still causing troubles within the U.S., and they have limited control over some of the military assets.
By chance, did they rise enormously in power under the reign of the first George H.W. Bush?
Yes, but the big one was George Bush Jr. You remember that $2.3 trillion disappeared from the Pentagon budget just before the 9/11 attacks.
The day before.
Yeah, well, that money was used to finance Blackwater, which was basically a kind of a modern-day SS. It's a military force, elite military force, not under control of the traditional military hierarchy. These are the so-called men in black. These are the problem. It's these private military financed by fiat dollars. That's why. But the weakness of that system is that mercenaries are only mercenary if you pay them. And so if we cut off their supply of dollars at the very high end of the system, then those people will no longer be loyal because they don't work for ideology. They work for dollars. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to cut them off financially. And a lot of the accounts have been frozen now at the highest level. We have people within the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements, which is the central bank of central banks, is supporting us and trying to cut these people off. And we have some of the members of the traditional royal families who are saying, hey, we are not part of this fascistic genocidal group, and we'll help you. Just make sure we can stay rich and powerful after it's all over.
Do they, by chance, not actually want to rule the world as such? They just want to be comfortable and powerful forever?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them are saying, hey, as long as we can have our palaces and our servants, we don't have to control the world. But it's the group that wanted to, kill 90% of humanity and create an absolute fascist dictatorship with them as a kind of superhuman elite. That's the problem now. So, the Rothschilds are still trying to cut a deal, or at least part of them are. And it's really, we're down to a hardcore group. And they're going to be removed from power. I mean, we can see the problem. The problem people now are Obama and Rahm Emanuel in Chicago, the head of Mossad there. We have Benjamin Netanyahu who's a problem. We have George Bush Sr. and all those guys who are a problem.
Kissinger Zbigniew Brzezinski.
Yeah, of course, Heinz Kissinger, and we're really down to a few people. And what happens is that they're being increasingly isolated. More and more people are no longer terrorized by them. They're trying to reassert. They need terror. They need fear. That's why they had to make a public execution of Gaddafi in order to try to reassert their control of the world's leaders, saying, hey, if you don't obey us, we'll kill you, like we killed Gaddafi, and see what we can do about it.
I saw a French correspondent on RT the other day saying that wasn't Gaddafi, and indeed they were just staging it in order to make Gaddafi come out of hiding and reveal his position.
All right, well, having said, I'll tell you something I heard from a Rothschild family source. I haven't confirmed this, but that's why I haven't written it yet, but he says that Gaddafi was already smuggled out of the country, and he's going to be given plastic surgery and a new identity, and that they faked the whole Gaddafi death so that they could justify a change of signatory control over the Libyan oil and money. So they said to Gaddafi, if you want to live, you sign over everything, and then we'll save you. But you need to give us the legal rights to the oil and the gold. But there's going to be a legal battle now. A lot of people are going to say, hey, because Gaddafi was one of the few people who did not have a Rothschild-controlled central bank in his country.
Very good.
He was signatory to the money in that country, him and his sons. And you remember when they invaded Libya, one of the first things they did was set up a central bank.
Yeah, and a central private oil company.
Yeah, this is a money grab by the fascist faction because they are running out of money. They are desperate, and that's the thing. They're being cut off financially, and you can see that with the euro crisis, for example. They're debating...
Aren't they just staging those crises in order to bring in their own world currency? No, they're not staging those crises. These things are falling. They're not getting money. That's the problem. They're being cut off at a very high level. If you look at the problems in the euro, if you do the math, you realize that there's no way they can save that currency. You see, Greece is not the problem. Greece is just the trigger, because the real debts are with Spain, Portugal, Italy, and the Baltic nations, the 5 Baltic countries. And Greece is just the first domino. That's all it is. Even if you save Greece, you don't save the other dominoes. So this is not going to happen. They're not going to be able to pull a rabbit out of that hat. But the question about a need for a global currency is that we do need something that can be used to facilitate international trade. The U.S. dollar was pretty good at that until it got hijacked by all these criminals who started, creating derivatives fraud and producing quadrillions of dollars when the world GDP is only 60 trillion. So it's really it's a battle between a virtual financial system that's based on numbers and computers at high-level financial institutions, and the real financial system that's based on people putting widgets in boxes and shipping them over to other parts of the planet. And we're trying to separate the real economy from the virtual economy. And for the real economy, you do need a common currency. It just makes it a lot more useful. I mean, every country can have their own currency, and any currency has to be based on the real world. It has to be backed by something that actually exists. Otherwise, it's just a hallucination. Yeah, well, that strikes me as the whole same argument as the provision of monetary policy in the essence of advancing trade policy. Because if you don't have something that everybody's free to exchange and that kind of thing, then you get bogged down in bartering about different amounts. How many beds is 1 ounce gold bar worth? That kind of thing. It just complicates the whole process, and it simply facilitates trade to have a fiat currency because you'll never have any lags of supply supply of liquidity, because you can make up what's needed for the trade at that time. The problem is that it's being loaned at interest by criminal banks to scum.
Exactly, and the other thing is that fiat cannot exist. It has to be based on something real. Okay, it has to symbolize something that actually exists. You can eat a $1 bill, but you won't get much nutrition out of it.
But it's full of essential links.
Fill your stomach. Okay.
Yeah.
And so it has to be backed by something. I don't believe gold is the only answer, because gold is being controlled by a very small group of people. I believe ultimately it has to be a basket of real life commodities and stuff, and then this is going to be worked on. But if it's not backed by reality, then you always will end up with crises. And that's the thing we're dealing with. In any case, unfortunately, I don't see things getting better until they get worse first. Okay, the old system is going to have to keep falling apart before these people are going to be willing to give up power. I am hearing from people in the CIA and the Pentagon and other places that there are going to be a bunch of arrests and there's going to be a big cleanup. I really hope that happens. They're saying it's going to happen by November 15th. But even if it does not happen by November 15th, there's going to be a continual collapse of the old system. There's no other way. It cannot mathematically survive as is.
Kind of like everybody just really does have to suffer the terrible effects of an infectious virus in order to gain their immunity.
Well, another way of looking at it is if you've overmaxed your credit card, you might have to sell your car, move into a smaller house, stop eating at fancy restaurants for a while, but you're not going to die. And what I mean by that is that a lot of countries, especially the countries, the United States, Australia, the Mediterranean countries, they have been living beyond their means for the past 30 years. And that means that they're going to have to lower their living standards to get back to reality. It's just a fact of life. If you don't have the money, you don't have the money. And this is like with the Greeks, for example. If they get off the euro, which would be a great thing for Greece, what will happen, first of all, is that they're not going to be able to buy Chinese TVs for the same price as before. It's going to cost twice as much as it used to. But the good thing is that Greece will be a really, really cheap country to visit as a tourist. It'll be a tourist boom, and all those hotels that are suffering now because they have to charge expensive euros are suddenly going to find themselves full of customers again. All the restaurants are going to have people in them again, and Greek exports will be competitive, and the real Greek people and the real Greek economy will benefit from having a currency that actually reflects their national economic reality as opposed to some kind of artificial European reality. So it will be a good thing, but, there's it's like when you, I've been an alcoholic, and when I've been quitting for the past 3 months, and you go through some withdrawal symptoms, but you end up feeling a lot healthier. Your face looks better in the mirror. You wake up with a clearer mind. You get more work done, And that's what's going to happen to a lot of these places. They're going to have to go through some withdrawal symptoms.
Yeah, and don't be afraid of the withdrawal symptoms. Just think what it's going to be like once you're on the road to better health.
Exactly. Anyway, there's going to be a lot more. I'm hearing stuff. They're going to plan more mischief in the Middle East. I think that Algeria is a likely target. I know there's 5 African nations, including Zaire, Somalia, and Uganda, they're going to try to make trouble with. And there's going to be a push to create Kurdistan. And you may even see a Turkish, Syrian, Iranian, Egyptian alliance against Israel. Okay? And this will be the Gog and Magog faction. Okay? The Gog and Magog faction are the people these religious fanatics who've been in control of a lot of the financial system, who believe that they have a duty to carry out the the prophecies of the Old Testament. And that means that there's going to be a war between two giant nations, Gog and Magog, in which 90% of humanity dies, and the other 10% are then enslaved. And this group, like I said, there are two factions. One wants to have Gog and Magog and then rule the world from Jerusalem, and the other wants to have Gog and Magog and then rule the world from Nazi bases in South America, you know? But in either case, these factions are going to make their big push. They believe that it's God. They believe it's destiny. They are religious fanatics. They're not rational people. They think they have the duty. They think it's God that's doing it when it's not. It's the Rothschilds brainwashing people into believing that they're carrying out some kind of holy prophecy. They're not. They're a bunch of superstitious religious fanatics trying to destroy the planet for irrational reasons, and the world has woken up to them, and you're not going to get away with this crazy stuff, all right? You're not. It's not going to happen. Humanity has woken up. And there's about 1 million of these people who belong to this control grid, you know, Freemasons and agents and all this kind of things. And they really believe that it's the prophecies and there's nothing you can do about it. Well, you're wrong because your scheme is already falling apart, isn't it?
You see, I thought that was the interesting thing about the future, is that it never happens the way you think it's gonna. And particularly when it comes to belief and prophecy and things of that nature, is that the people believe in it so strongly that they try and bring it about, right? And therefore it's not actually the prophecy that's coming true, it's just somebody artificially using it as a playbook.
Yeah. However, I've said this before, but I think it's worth repeating, is that maybe we should, to some extent, do that. Okay, like there was a French mathematician who did some calculating, and he figured out the day of his death. And when that day came around, he was so scared, he killed himself. Okay? Well, all right, that's a bit silly, but what we can do, and I've proposed it. This is let's end the world in 2012. Let's actually do it. I don't mean what I mean by it is have some huge party. Okay, you don't kill 90% of people, but have some totally extraordinary event, right? And then you can like reset everything. So it would be the year 0, you know, day 1. Say, all right, like December 21st. 2012. That would be the beginning of a new solar year, right? We could have a new calendar there. We could have world peace. We could free all the technology that these people have been hogging for themselves. We could make it so that everyone would be convinced that, okay, this is the end of the old world, the end of the war, the world of war and humans killing each other, and the beginning of something new. So I'm personally in favor of saying, all right, well, why don't we do that? Why don't we have a big party and just, you know, reboot the planet Earth? Because we all know that there's something wrong with the way the planet's run now.
Yeah. And there's only 2 words to justify that kind of action, Ben. Why not?
Yeah. I mean, you know, let's do it. And the thing is, so it's not going to be controlled in secret by an inbred elite of Satan-worshipping royal families, okay? That's just not going to happen. It's going to be humanity as a whole that's going to sort of say, hey, we want to decide how we go into the future ourselves. We don't want some religious fanatics, you know, forcing us to live according to some ancient book. We will decide. We will decide what we want. Maybe we want to build a space colony so people can have anti-gravity, holidays. Or we want to devote all that energy that's being, you know, all that research money that was going into high-tech weapons into ways to make us live longer. You know, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I always wondered what a zero-gravity nightclub would be like.
Well, there you go. I mean, or a zero-gravity hotel room or whatever. You know, the thing is that if people could decide, all right, this is what we want to do in the future, then it would be a much nicer planet. And, of course, anything they decide would have to be turned into reality. That means we have to have some kind of process where we can turn dreams into reality, because they don't, you know, You can't live in a house unless you build it first, right? And we have to set up a process where we can build a great future realistically. Dreams are fine, but you have to connect the dreams to reality, and that's where we need to totally revamp all the institutions that were created by the fascists and the monarchists so that we can carry out humanity's wishes on behalf of the planet Earth.
And it's the same principle of fulfilling your own passions and desires and dreams in your own life is think up the most grandiose, beautiful thing you can think of that you really want to see happen, and then think about some very easy and simple, realistic steps on the way to achieving that goal. And it will happen.
Our group has some very concrete plans, okay? First of all, we've realized that the oil and nuclear companies have suppressed a lot of energy technology because they wanted to maintain their control over the global economic system. And if we release that technology in a way that doesn't disturb the old paradigms that allows them to evolve, we can do things, for example, we can take salt out of seawater and turn the deserts green. That would automatically increase the livable part of the planet for humans by 300%. Okay? Agricultural land only consists of 11% of the land area of Earth. Desert is 34%. And then if you take the Arctic domes, I'm from Canada, for example, and it would be great if we could have palm trees on Hudson's Bay, because right now Canada's a frozen wasteland. The other thing we can do is that we have wiped out 90% of large fishes, for example, in the past 50 years. We could replenish the oceans with fish. In fact, we could make more fish than there were before humans came on the scene. These are realistic things. And we could end poverty within 2 months if we had the will. It's a logistical problem. There's no need for any child to be hungry on this planet. None whatsoever. It's a logistical problem. It could be solved in 2 months if there was a will to do so. So, okay, ending poverty, stopping environmental destruction, I think everybody can agree to that. And I believe everybody would agree that we'd rather have world peace than world war. So if you start with stuff that everybody agrees upon, then that shouldn't be a problem. And I think we also agree that we don't want a single monolithical body controlling everything. We don't want a one world headquarters where that's in charge of everything. That's just not something we want. But we do want a minimum set of rules. We all breathe the same air, we drink the same water, we live on the same planet, and we need some basic rules. Any village, any tribe, any group of humans has rules. You don't kill other people, you don't steal, We need basic international rules. So, for example, when Hillary Clinton and those scumbags killed Gaddafi, well, they should be put in jail for murder.
Pretty much.
I mean, you shouldn't be able to get away with murder just because you're head of a powerful cabal. Murder is murder. It's a crime. So we do need some minimal rules to make sure that we don't have wars and we don't have international crime on a large scale.
And I think the same goes for knowingly deceiving people.
Yeah, I mean, so we do need to totally revamp the way we live together on this planet. I think we can all agree to that, and I think we all agree we don't want a single central government telling us how to, live in detail, and especially one that's being selected by themselves, not selected by the people of the planet.
Exactly.
And the other thing I'd have to say is,
I feel the best way forward is to just go back and localize, not globalize, because who knows better about your backyard and how to run it than you? Why should you listen to anybody else who's way far afield, has no experience in your area of your life, and basically will only try and pass legislation to suit themselves?
You need both, okay? Some things you need big operations. For example, turning the Sahara green, okay? That's a huge international effort. That requires some big institutions to carry out a project like that. But once the infrastructure is set up, then each farmer who goes into new agricultural land can decide what crop he wants to have and and what kind of family arrangements he wants. All that kind of stuff could be decided locally. But there's a need for both. But the other thing is that the institution of democracy needs to be modernized. Democracy worked well in a small Greek city-state. It does not work well in a huge country of 320 million like the United States, because using paper every 4 years to select your leaders is no longer necessary. That's old technology. We have the means now to have an instant, real-time process of democracy through, everybody can express their will all the time, not just once every 4 years. Look, there's going to be a lot of discussion to figure out how we want to run the planet in the future, but we know for sure that we don't want the criminal, fascists, mass murderers who are in charge now to stay in charge.
Exactly. That's the simple decision. What do we all agree on? We don't want mass murdering, sociopathic, pedophile, Satan-worshipping criminals running the planet. Okay, we can all agree on that. All the rest of the stuff is just pure conjecture, and we'll have plenty of time to discuss that while we're not being exterminated by scumbags.
Yes, and I think we also agree we want to end poverty, stop environmental destruction, end war, and create a wonderful new future. I think we all agree on that. It's a no-brainer.
Yep.
It's going to happen. It's going to happen. They're not going to be able to put the genie back into the bottle, but I have to head off now, so I'll just conclude with this. I'll let you know that it's going to happen, but there's going to be a lot of turmoil as the old system collapses. Just make sure that what is immediately around you is safe. Make sure that your family and your loved ones will be able to survive any temporary falling apart of the old system. Okay?
Okay.
But we're going to have a wonderful, wonderful new planet coming up soon. Okay? Thanks for talking to me. Bye.
All right. Thank you, Benjamin Fulford.